Welcome to TAEDEL311 Provide Work Skill Instruction and BSBCMM411 Make Presentations. In this session we're going to look at three projects, projects 2, 3 and 4, task 1. Now the reason why we're going to look at three projects at the same time is task 1 essentially is the same for each of those projects. It's just the topic and the context that will change. So once you get task 1 done for project 2, you can actually use this as a benchmark for completing project 3 task 1 and project 4 task 1. So task 1 is your presentation work skill instruction session plan and task breakdown. This essentially is the document that you will follow when you are actually presenting and doing your work skill instruction, which we'll do as part of task 3. So let's go through and have a look at what's required here. In this unit of study, or these units of study I should say, you're required to prepare, present and evaluate a total of 3 presentations. Each of them need to be a duration of 30 minutes and have different requirements with regards to your audience. As I said before, the topics will be different. Task 1, project 2 and 3, we've selected the topic for you and you'll find that some of the information's already been filled in for you. But for project 4, task 1, 2, 3 and 4, you're required to actually select a topic of your choice. This must be a work-based topic, so it can't be something that you do as a hobby. It must be a work-based topic. So let's have a look at the instructions around project 2 task 1 and we'll go through and make sure that you're clear with what's required here. Then we're going to have a look at the template and I'll go through each of the different parts of the template and give you some little hints and tips on what we're looking for with regards to your submission for this particular task. So you're required to develop and prepare a presentation and work skill instruction session on completing a personal risk assessment. Now, if you're not sure what a personal risk assessment is, it's just like a nice simple take 5, commonly undertaken in workplaces before you start your day or before you start a new task. You're required to complete the preparation plan using the template below, and you'll be delivering this session to 1 learner. The presentation and work skill instruction must be a minimum 30-minute duration. You'll be required to fully complete the template that's covered below. And so what we'll do is we'll go through and have a look at that now. Okay, so for your presentation work skill instruction, you're the presenter or coach. So you make sure that you put your full name in there. Now, just a little heads up on the training and assessing qualification. We always use full names, full first name, full last name. No use of nicknames or abbreviations or any kinds of initialing in here. So it should be always full first name, full last name. The date is the date that you'll actually be presenting this topic. And you can see here we've partially filled it in for you. So in this case, it's completing a personal risk assessment. You could add what your company name for that is. In some cases, it might be a take 5, or it could be called other things. Or you could just use the generic terminology that's there. You'll notice that we've also added in a unit of competency reference. Units of competency are something that you're going to learn quite a lot about during the course. So it's good to actually start up front by looking at what the national unit of competency is that could be linked to this particular presentation work skill instruction. In this case, we've looked at the unit BSBWHS 308, participate in WHS identification and risk assessment and risk control processes. We've also listed the specific criteria out of that national unit of competency that this particular work skill instruction relates to. It wouldn't be a bad idea for you at this point in time, if you're not familiar with the term unit of competency, to actually look it up. Go on to our national register for training products, the training.gov.au, and you will actually find lots and lots of units of competencies that relate to qualifications and training packages relative to the area that you're working in. Go in and have a look at some, find some that are relative to the type of training that you might be doing when you complete this course. Either way, your training as we move through these units will help you to get familiar with that website. All right, moving into the document a little bit further, you're then required to link what performance benchmarks relate to this particular work skill instruction. So what is the company's risk assessment procedure? What policies? Are there any other procedures that relate to this particular training work skill instruction that you're providing? Then we've got the learning outcomes. Learning outcomes can sometimes be called learning objectives, although the common name for us is to use them as learning outcomes, or training outcomes sometimes can be a term that's used. Either way, it's a statement that's very clear that states at the end of this session, you will, and from there it goes through and steps through what a person will actually achieve. We never use the terms you might, should, or could be able to, it's you will. So we project that area of confidence that we have in our ability to achieve that objective, but also the learner's ability to achieve it as well. In this case, there are two learning objectives or learning outcomes. To understand how to correctly complete a personal risk assessment to site standards. So that word understand is the key word here. That infers there's going to be some knowledge or there's going to be some theory that's going to be attached to this session. And then we've got our second learning outcome is to demonstrate how to correctly complete a personal risk assessment to site standards. So the word here, demonstrate, is a key word. So this means they're actually going to be performing the task. So there's a practical aspect to the session. So we've got knowledge and skills coming into our learning outcome, or if you want to call it, theory and practical associated with it. You will then outline who you're presenting to. If you're doing this as a face-to-face class, then you will be role-playing it with one of your peers here in the room or during your session. Why are they there? This has already been filled in for you. And again, like I said, it creates a bit of a benchmark for you. You might want to add a little bit more detail in there if you feel that that would be relative back in your workplace. So you can always add information here where we've already got a pre-filled kind of response, but certainly don't take anything away. The next area is your learner characteristics. Once you've determined who your learner is, then you need to take some time to find out what their needs are. Where do they work? How long have they worked there? What's their experience with the topic, in this case a personal risk assessment or a Take 5? Do they need any learning support to actually achieve the outcome? Do they have any issues with regards to reading or writing? So therefore, what sort of assistance might we need? In this case, you've got to identify two learner characteristic needs and fill them in at the beginning there. This unit also has some foundation skills, and we've pre-filled the foundation skills in there, so you can see that what sort of things the person might need to read or write or communicate. Navigate the world of work means, are they actually following policies and procedures and systems and processes while they're performing the task? And then interact with others. What's their communication like? Are they communicating with others? And are they getting the work done? In other words, are they planning and organising and implementing and finalising what things need to be done to achieve this outcome? As I said before, you're required to talk to your learner and find out what kind of experience they have in the topic, where they work, what they do, etc. And really importantly, do they need any support in any areas in regards to these foundation skills? From there, we move on to the area of notifying the learners. So think about this from back in your workplace, not here where you're doing it as part of an assessment. That's a little bit of a hint for everything that you do throughout this course. Don't think of this as filling in an assessment for your assessor to fill in. for your assessor to mark, I should say. Instead, think about this as if you were filling this in back in your workplace. How would you notify the learners of the session? Would your learning department let people know? Would it be your responsibility as the work skill instruction or supervisor to let them know? How would that actually occur back in your workplace? And from here, we start to look at the preparation, what kind of preparation you would undertake. Would you do a couple of practice run-throughs? Would you go and watch somebody else delivering it to see how they do it? So there's a lot of different ways that you could approach this. And again, we want you to think about this as back in your workplace. If you had to deliver a Take 5 back in your workplace, how would you go about delivering it? What preparation would you put into place? Your resources, what kind of resources would you actually use for this work skill instruction presentation? And you must include at least one resource that you have developed to support your presentation to engage the audience. Now look, that could be an activity, it could be a video that you've found with some questions that you ask at the end of the video. You should never just play a video and go, there you go, there's my resource. There should also be some kind of activity which promotes interaction and also checking that they've actually watched and listened to the video and got something from it. So maybe some quiz questions at the end, and it might be just a simple ABC. Confirming your resources, how would you go about confirming your resources back in your workplace? And you can see we've put some points in there for confirming a safe learning environment and a safety briefing. You can add points to those bullet points that are there if you wish to. You might want to expand on them a little bit more and put a little bit more information next to each of them. If that's what makes it easier for you while you're presenting your work skill instruction, then that's good practice to do in the planning process. And last but not least, in this first part of task 1 is to look at the follow-up. What kind of follow-up practice would you arrange for the participant back in the workplace if it was required? For example, would you tell them that they need to practice it? Would you go and have a chat to their supervisor and say to the supervisor, I need you to make sure that this person is given the opportunity to do this at least once a day for the next 5 days to reinforce what's actually occurred as part of the session that you've delivered. So think about what follow-up there is. It's all great that we can actually involve people in a learning process to achieve a learning outcome, but some of it's got to also go back on them and go back on them to practice back in their workplace to reinforce that learning that's achieved. All right, so moving on, we get into the detail of the session plan. This would be the document that you might follow while you're delivering your work skill instruction. The earlier part of this document is kind of a little bit of background information, but this session plan really needs to be filled in detail. The purpose of a session plan is it's your roadmap. It's how it's going to help you to get from A to B and then on to C and D to achieve the overall learning outcomes that you outlined earlier. The key reasons why somebody might receive a resubmission on this particular submission is probably because they haven't filled in the timing in the first column. So please make sure that you do fill in the timing in the first column. The second reason why people might get a resubmission is they actually haven't put enough information into the activities column. And resources also need to be adjusted where required. So the important thing here is when you're writing a session plan, good practice again to make sure that the session plan is transferable to another coach, work skill instructor or presenter. What we mean by that is it's written in such a way that somebody else could follow it. Think about it in your workplace. If Billy had to be coached or trained on how to fill in a personal risk assessment and he was trained by you following this session plan, yet his colleague who started on the same day as him was coached or trained by somebody else who didn't follow this session plan, what do you think might happen when those two people come together and start working together? They're bound to have a conversation along the lines of, oh, I wasn't taught that way. So a session plan should be a transferable document that all work skill instructors, coaches and presenters follow to ensure that there's consistency in the way that these people are trained within the workplace. So think about it when you're writing it as if somebody else had to follow it. That's good practice for a lot of what we do in the Cert 4 and training and assessing. So it's a good practice to get started with that now. Our session plan has 3 key parts. It has an introduction, a body and a conclusion. There are some key prompters here to help you throughout writing this session plan. The introduction makes use of an acronym called INTROS, where we cover off on, in that orange column, interest, need, time, roadmap, outcome, and safety. So let's go through each of those and have a look at what kind of detail you might be putting in here. So in here it says explain to stimulate the learner's interest in the topic. You would explain what a risk assessment is, and you should have a number of bullet points after each of these headings that are in the prompting session plan. So what kinds of prompters might you put in there? So you might put some WHS risk assessment points. So say, for instance, what is a risk assessment? Well, in our workplace, a Take 5 is the basic form of risk assessment that everyone must fill in at the start of a day. Think about what kind of barriers or distractions there might be and explain how you're going to remove them. How you're going to link the learning to previous experience. And this is where having that conversation with them earlier to find out what their needs are and what their level of knowledge on the topic is becomes important. Do we have an icebreaker? Are we going to set some clear ground rules and outline what those clear ground rules are here? In the need area, we'll explain why it's required, and that's kind of filled in a bit for you. We might ask some questions. What do you know about risk assessments? How much experience do you have in filling in a risk assessment? In the time area, we'll explain what the time frame is, so what's going to happen and what the time frame for the session is going to be, if there's going to be any breaks or any homework that needs to be completed after. In the roadmap area, we will set a bit of an agenda, and this is where you would generally say, so in the first 10 minutes of this session, I'm going to explain to you what a risk assessment is, and I'm going to show you some examples of some Take 5s. Then after that, I'm going to take you through how to fill in a Take 5. And then after that, I'm going to get you to fill in a Take 5 with me. And I'm going to make sure and give you a bit of feedback after you've filled in that Take 5 to make sure that you feel comfortable doing it yourself, independently, confidently, and competently back in the workplace following today's session. And at the end of the session today, I might ask you just a few little quiz questions just to make sure that you understand what needs to be understood with regards to this particular session. So you'd set them up, and so that way they know what's going to happen in the next 30 minutes. The outcome is where we would share the outcome, and again, I would copy and paste this from where we had the learning outcome in the earlier part of this particular task. All right, and go through and talk about safety checks. Then we move into the body of the actual session. This is where we'll talk about how we're going to take them through the process. There are a number of different coaching models that can be followed. Commonly used is the DEDECT model, and your trainer can take you through the DEDECT model, and there is also information both in the PowerPoints and in your learner guide with regards to the DEDECT model. Either way, it doesn't matter what model is actually used, but we've got to have a process for how we're actually going to take them through the task itself. So if you think about it, it might be do it normal, a professional demo. So in other words, I'm going to demonstrate for you. Now I'm going to do it a little bit slower. Now you do it with me, now off you go, now have a go by yourself. That's another model that could also be followed. What you would also have in here are the steps. So to fill in a Take 5, it requires you to go through these steps, and you'll need to complete or fill in a task breakdown. And you might want to put a little bit more detail next to each of these steps. And you can see a screenshot of a Take 5 has been added in there as well to help the coach, presenter, work skill instructor to go through the various tasks with the person. Then you see there's guided practice and independent practice. Then we do a bit of a recap, and we also assess or give them a bit of feedback on how they went and what things maybe they need to do differently or better next time round. Then we move into our conclusion, and this is where we turn them off. In the intros, we went through the intros, and in the conclusion, we go through the outcome. So we revisit the outcome. So I stated at the beginning of this session, you would understand how to fill in a Take 5 and what its place is in our workplace. You might ask them a few questions to make sure that they do understand. And then you'd go through and talk to them about how you demonstrated and how they got a chance to fill in a Take 5, and give them a bit of feedback on that as well. And again, remind them that the outcome has actually been met, that they do understand and they have demonstrated. And that's where that feedback piece fits. And then again, as we mentioned before, you always go through, confirm what the next steps are, put it back on them. It's our job to take them through the work skill instruction. It's their job to make sure that it's reinforced and not forgotten. So make sure that you take a little bit of time to tell them what your expectations are for them following this particular session. And you'll see right on the very last page, if I scroll through, there is an example of a personal risk assessment Take 5. So if while you're conducting your work skill instruction, you don't have your own workplace Take 5 that you can use, then there's an example of one here. And we look forward to receiving your submission for this particular task. Just don't forget that for projects 3 and 4, task 1, you're required to basically do the same thing. It's just a different topic. It won't be for the risk assessment, it will be for a different topic.